Members, I have received correspondence from the member for Mulka as follows. I propose for discussion this day the following definite matter of public importance: the government's failure to maintain critical protection of sacred sites. The letter is signed by the member for Mulka. Is the discussion supported? Please stand. Okay. Discussion is supported. The question, member for Mulka.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is about the government's failure to maintain critical protection of sacred sites. I have brought this MPI today because I am disgusted to see how this government is behaving when it becomes sacred sites. Madam Speaker, sacred sites are great significance in the Northern Territory. The English term sacred sites does not give good understanding to the breadth of what the sacred site embeds. Non-Indigenous people might think it is a special place with a spiritual importance, and this is true, but it goes much more deeper than this. I will talk about these places from a Yolngu perspective to try and give greater understanding. First, out on country, there is no empty land or sea. To someone who doesn't know our country, they might think it is empty because there are no buildings. But the Yolngu eye, the space is full of places of significance, sacred sites, landmarks, songlines, ancestral creations. It is a busy landscape, just like a city. I think about New York City and activity on the ground, beneath the ground, in the sky, and out into the water. This is what we see when we look at our country. Sacred sites are places that are equivalent to the Parliament. Dr. Gumana from Gangan, Maingati, said, "Your Parliament is built on land. Our Parliament is the land." Sacred sites are places where acknowledge and authority is given and made clear, a place where a law stems from. They are places which connect to governance now and from our ancestors in the past. The knowledge from these sites is the upper level knowledge from a university institution rather, and law connected with the sacred site is equivalent to the laws created here in the Parliament, where we are standing now. A week ago, Senator Thorpe stated at the rally that she would burn down Parliament. I don't believe that she meant to do it, but I believe that she was saying, this is how strong I feel on issues. It was a way to expressing her emotions. But the response from the community was very strong. The Australian Federal Police were asked to investigate. And this is because the Parliament is seen as a sacred place. It is a sacred place for Western culture. And so the thought of any damage to a discretion of discretion to the Parliament site was seen as a significant threat. Something that would not be tolerated and required police action. The offence and threat to people felt when Senator Thorpe talked about burning down Parliament is the offence and threat that we feel when someone threatens our sacred sites. So in May, when the government brought a bill to amend the Sacred Sites Act in this Parliament without any genuine consultation other than the Darwin Waterfront Corporation, elders and leaders and community members felt worried and threatened by the government. We felt greatly threatened and concerned that the government would introduce a bill about sacred sites without consultation of land councils, elders and leaders. Because sacred sites are our jurisdiction, they are our business. In response to the lack of consultation, the Central Land Council said that the minister threatened them like children. Warren Williams said he asked us to simply accept that the government's intentions behind the changes are good. He wouldn't give us details about the changes or how they would work. Madam Speaker, the government's intentions were not good. The minister very, very clearly changed the Sacred Sites Act for the purpose of going around Larrakia people, the elders, to secure development permissions for his friends at Darwin Waterfront Corporation. And by doing that, he has weakened the law of our capacity to protect sacred sites. And by adding other parties to an existing sacred sites certificate, he is currently lighting the match to set fire to a sacred site. Madam Speaker, a sacred site is alive. It is a place which must be looked after to ensure that people are protected. And it can be very serious when a sacred site is damaged or disrespected. When I was a young boy, young man, I remember my father becoming very unwell as an elder, his spirit was strong, connected to land. Another family had gone hunting, fishing, and near the sacred site. They had started a fire where they shouldn't have, and they had not put out the fire. After they left, the fire burnt deeper into the sacred site area, into the ground. At this time, my father was at home and 30 kilometers away from the site and had become very unwell with a fever, and he was burning hot. This was my father. So some of the senior elders looked at him and told the young ones to go and take a look at the sacred site to see if there was a problem. When they went down there to the fishing spot, to the sacred site, they saw that the fire was burning strongly and doing damage. The fire was put out, and my father became instantly well. The connection that we have to our sacred sites is very strong, and like my father, people can become unwell when the site is damaged. And sacred from the elders, it can be rippled out further into that damage is going because we are all connected with the land. When governments change the laws for sacred sites, it can damage implications for the people who are responsible for sacred sites. This is why the Aboriginal people of the NT, the land councils, and the board of APA have felt very upset when the minister pushed through changes to change the act. But now we know that changes were specifically for the purpose of transferring a certificate to a third party, so that new development could be made at the Darwin waterfront against the wishes of the TOs. Minister has said that this new development will not impact sacred sites, but I don't believe the minister is a Larrakian person, and I don't believe he has authority to speak on behalf of this land. The Larrakia people of this land say that it will impact the site. This development of an 11-story building on the edge and on the end of the convention centre has already been knocked by the Larrakia people, and because it will interfere with the sacred site. Yes, there is an 11-story building already at the waterfront, but does not interfere with the sacred site, and this was why the certificate was provided in 2004. Because the plans that were shown to the elders did not impact the site. The new development does impact our sacred site, and the Larrakia people have already said no. But the government didn't care, and they changed the law without transparency. They were asked several times, and they did not say that the purpose of the changes was to help a foreign company proceed with a development at the Darwin Waterfront that will damage sacred sites. Madam Speaker, last month the NT government made an application to add the Darwin Waterfront Corporation to 𝒔 Darwin Hotel as recorded parties to the authority certificate. C2024, C20/2004 to 4000, C24 to 004, which covers the Darwin Waterfront precinct. This is a certificate from long ago that was provided by APA for the development plans that were given to the Larrakia people for consultation at the time. The Larrakia Nation CEO Michael Rotuma stated, this decision demonstrates how the voices of the Larrakia custodians are being systemically sidelined, and the matters affect their sacred sites legislative and ministerial interference has eroded APA's independence in reducing the statutory authority to allow processes. Larrakia Cultural Authority is not a negotiable, and this development risks irreversible damage to places of profound significance, and the Northern Territory government must engage with the custodians, not legislation around them. Madam Speaker, I have a zero tolerance a policy for the willful interference and damage to sacred sites. I am angry and frustrated by this government and their attitude. Elderly strongly agree sacred sites on the land cannot be damaged. That's why I feel strongly about what is happening here in Larrakia country. We stand here on Larrakia country and do businesses in this parliament, and every morning acknowledge the tiaos of this land. And the minister has done something very, very wrong on this Larrakia land. He treated to damage the Larrakia site, and he changed the laws, and now he is carrying the threat out by obtaining the certificate and giving consent to an 11-story building of a hotel to be built in front of the 𝒊𝒐𝒏. Madam Speaker, look at the waterfront area. The Larrakia people are not against development. You can see that by looking at the water was very important. Madam Speaker, the Minister must fix this situation and protect the sacred sites at 𝒊𝒐𝒏 Walk and ensure the APA and I elderly and consulted many people decision making about sacred sites. Minister must not be on behalf of the Larrakia people about their sacred sites. He must speak truthfully about the bill that came before the Parliament in May. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister for Lands, Planning and Environment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And today I rise to speak to the member for Mulca's matter of public importance. Madam Speaker, the Northern Territory Aboriginal Sacred Sites Act 1989 is an important piece of legislation which ensures the protection of our sacred sites and cultural heritage. It is a primary legislation in the Northern Territory for protecting Aboriginal sacred sites, establishing a register of sites and outlining criminal offences for unauthorised entry or damage. The Act is administered by the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority, commonly referred to as ARPA, an independent statutory authority which requires developers and others to obtain authority certificates for work conducted near sacred sites or on, and has the power to prosecute those who damage sites. Since the Act commenced operation in 1989, there have been considerable economic, political and social developments in the Northern Territory. Despite these developments, the Acts had not been updated in more than 30 years, even though the PricewaterhouseCoopers had undertaken a thorough review in 2016. Since coming into government, I've had a number of conversations with industry and stakeholders who have raised significant issues around exorbitant costs of obtaining authority certificates and the inability to transfer them. Madam Speaker, even though authority certificates are issued in perpetuity and are associated with a particular area of land or object or feature on that land, they could not be transferred when the land title is transferred to a new individual or entity prior to our new amendments being assented. And I note the member for Mulca spoke about them extensively in his contribution. And the other significant issue was that the only compliance tool available for the authority to enforce the Act was to prosecute developers and/or individuals once an offence has occurred. This government wants proponents to get their certificates, Madam Speaker. We want them to look at their certificates like it's a golden ticket, something that they must work hard to obtain and then work hard to comply with. This government is committed to reducing red tape and removing duplication in regulatory processes, and we've shown that right across the board, promoting economic development while maintaining strong protections for Aboriginal sacred sites. And so that is why, Madam Speaker, on the 15th of May 2025, the NT Government passed amendments to the Act. The Anti-Aboriginal Sacred Sites Legislation Amendment Bill in 2025 improved the regulatory framework by tightening timeframes and reducing red tape, while also enhancing protections for sacred sites. The amendments provided a concise suite of administrative reforms to improve the operation of the Sacred Sites Act. These reforms strengthen sacred sites protection and improve the efficiency of regulatory processes to support safe and respectful development in the NT. The changes now encourage more people to seek authority certificates from the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority as a proactive measure to safeguard sacred sites, not to avoid the process. The reforms added enforceable undertakings, which is a key feature many other environmental and legislative regimes. Enforceable undertakings are a legally binding alternative to court proceedings and are a feature of most modern environmental regulatory regimes, both in the Territory and nationally. They help ensure remediation and stronger compliance through clear timeframes and monitoring to ensure accountability. Enforceable undertakings also mean that traditional owners can be directly compensated by those who are found to have desecrated sacred sites, and this was not possible prior to the amendments. This was something, Madam Speaker, that representatives at a Central Land Council meeting that I attended brought to my attention. They were frustrated that even after someone had been prosecuted for doing the wrong thing in regards to a sacred site, that the money that was then found or paid by the proponent who had done the wrong thing didn't end up going to traditional owners. Through these enforceable undertakings, that is now an option, Madam Speaker, that can be sought. The reforms clarified practices that were already in place regarding composition of the Board of ARPA, which remains at 10 members nominated by the 4 land councils and 2 members nominated by the Minister. The reforms preserve the Minister's right to remove his nominated 2 members at his discretion. The reforms introduced a mechanism to transfer an authority certificate to another person for the same area of land and the same works where prior consultations have already been undertaken. Importantly, preserving the original protections, limitations or controls on an area of land and addressing process inefficiencies and duplication. And the reforms introduced a mechanism to have additional persons or groups added as recorded parties to authority certificates on application of the certificate holder, while still preserving the original protections, limitations or controls on an area of land. This has reduced the regulatory burden and red tape in long-term projects, involving multiple parties and ensuring any conditions required for protection of sacred sites apply to these additional parties. These amendments struck a balance between the protection of cultural heritage and economic development, ensuring that sacred sites remain protected while reducing unnecessarily delays in approvals. Madam Speaker, with regards to the consultation around these changes to the Sacred Sites Act, and in addition to the extensive consultation undertaken with traditional owners, industry stakeholders and government agencies as part of the comprehensive 2016 review, I engaged in a face-to-face meeting with the board of the ARPA in January 2025, where I gave notice that I intended to make amendments to the Act. A then face-to-face and video conference with executive members of the 4 land councils on Thursday the 20th of March 2025. And then, Madam Speaker, I travelled out to Yulara to meeting with the full Central Land Council on Thursday the 10th of April 2025, where I answered a range of questions for over an hour to ensure that TOs that had concerns had their chance to voice those concerns. And Madam Speaker, the amendments to the Sacred Sites Act were referred to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee when I introduced the amendment bill on the 27th of March this year. The committee received 30 submissions to its inquiry, and those submissions were varied. There were some in support, Madam Speaker, of the policy intent of the bill. I would like to thank again the important work of the members of the Scrutiny Committee and also each member organisation in our community who made submissions to that inquiry. I also need to acknowledge the advice obtained by the Scrutiny Committee from their independent legal advisor, Mr Ned Augustin, who agreed that in his view, the proposal, sections 24A and 24B, are not inconsistent with the Aboriginal Lands Right Act, otherwise known as ALRA, or section 42 of the Sacred Sites Act, being the transfer provisions. So it's important, Madam Speaker, to say again, the independent legal advice obtained by the Legislative Scrutiny Committee confirmed the amendments to the Anti-Aboriginal Sacred Site Act were not inconsistent with ALRA. So how can these opposite claim that we are failing to ensure adequate protections for sacred sites across the Northern Territory? We are strengthening, Madam Speaker, the legislation and processes around that to ensure that NT sacred sites are protected and continue to remain protected. The changes that we made to the Act provided long overdue modernisation of the legislation to bring it in line with contemporary expectations for both sacred site protection and development. The Aboriginal Lands Right Act requires that laws concerning sacred sites must provide a mechanism which takes into account the wishes of Aboriginal people in determining the extent to which those sites are protected. With regards to the transferring of authority certificates, this process is administrative in nature, and all protective conditions imposed at the time of issuing the original certificate carry over to the new party. or as new aims are added, ensuring continuing protection of sacred sites. This provision is consistent with the requirements of the Commonwealth's Aboriginal Lands Rights Act, as it does not seek to change any of the protections initially imposed, which would have considered the wishes of the relevant custodians for the extent to which sacred sites are protected. In respect of the same work and use, there is no intent to change the way any sacred site is protected. Where there is a change to the works or proposed use of the land, or a proponent seeks to change the protective conditions that have been imposed, this administrative transfer would not be available and the proponent must apply for a new authority certificate. And the same applies with long-term large-scale development projects involving multiple entities. These changes to the Act allow the holder of the existing authority certificate to apply for additional individuals or groups to be listed as recorded parties. Prior to the changes, each entity had to go through the process to obtain a certificate, even if it is for the same area of land and the same works. The amendments now allow for continuity of approved work where there is no change to the nature or location of the work or the use of the land. Most importantly, Madam Speaker, the provisions do not permit new work, expanded impact or altered activity without further assessment and, where necessary, renewed consultation with custodians. The suggestion that this prioritises economic development over cultural authority is totally unfounded. This approach is consistent with the principles of both the Sacred Sites Act and the Commonwealth Aboriginal Lands Rights Act, which aim to protect Aboriginal cultural heritage while enabling responsible land use. The implementation of an enforceable undertakings regime has introduced a fair and constructive approach to compliance, allowing for negotiated outcomes for minor breaches rather than immediate prosecutions. And this is something that traditional owners themselves wanted to see, Madam Speaker. So where there are going to be benefits to TOs through development, they want to be able to work to the proponent to ensure that any discretions are dealt with and that everyone can move forward. If they're not happy with that, Madam Speaker, they can still proceed to prosecution. The changes we made do not reframe or diminish the authority's core role of protecting sacred sites. These changes maintain the authority's fundamental responsibility to ensure that any proposed use of land does not pose a risk to sacred sites, and that custodians are consulted and their knowledge respected before a certificate is issued. These changes were designed to empower the authority and also to encourage greater collaboration between proponents and the authority by creating opportunities to resolve issues with respect to sacred sites. Madam Speaker, the key performance indicators for the authority from the 1st of July 2025 to the 29th of September 2025 have seen 27 authority certificates have been issued. Really important to note the important work that the authority does and is continuing to do, issuing certificates so that sacred sites can continue to be protected. There were 306 information requests that have been completed. 72 sacred sites have been recorded, another really important piece of work that the authority does. 5 sacred sites have been registered, 1 recorded parties application has been issued, 3 transfer applications have been received, and 1 transfer application has been issued. Just to conclude, Madam Speaker, these numbers, whilst just numbers, highlight the important work that ARPA and the Sacred Sites Act continues to do to protect sacred sites right across the Northern Territory, taking into consideration the concerns of traditional owners and enabling development to occur right across the NT. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for 𝒂𝒑𝒅.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I take the opportunity to rise tonight to speak to the matter of public importance raised by the member for Mulka as an important topic for this parliament to talk about tonight. And Madam Speaker, what I have just witnessed in this chamber is absolutely, utterly disgraceful. The Environment Minister, the member for Breitling, comes in here and whitewashes over the importance of this MPI. Now, for those people who might not understand what whitewashing is, it's a process when someone comes forward and tries to hide the faults or failures or problems with something and tries to tell a different story, tries to sell something to say it's not as bad as it is. Well, I'm sorry, tonight you don't get to come in here and tell an Aboriginal man, a respected elder from the Northern Territory, how he should think and feel about the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority's legislation. He's one of the only people in this chamber who absolutely is connected to every aspect of the Northern Territory, to language, to law, to culture. For a non-Indigenous person to come in here tonight, read a speech that they probably haven't even read before stepping in this chamber and completely disrespect an Aboriginal member of this parliament, telling them what they should and shouldn't do and how they shouldn't think, and this legislation is not a big problem. It's not causing faults to Aboriginal areas of significance. When an Aboriginal member has spoken about the direct harm that his own family has experienced when sites are damaged is appalling. Madam Speaker, we are not in 1788. We are not flora and fauna. The member for Mulka, the member for Arnhem, the member for Daly, myself, we are not fauna. We are Territorians. But you get this government, they come in here and they talk like they know what is best, what needs to happen in the Northern Territory. Well, Madam Speaker, it's pretty simple. The government need to start using their brains. Don't wreck things that don't belong to you. Places in the Northern Territory that are sacred sites belong to Aboriginal Territorians. They always have and they always will belong to Aboriginal people. The member for Mulka brought this matter of public importance to this chamber because of the echoing calls from the bush. People talking about their anxiety, their concern, their heartache about places of cultural and spiritual significance potentially being damaged. Because what they hear is they hear a minister stand up and say, there is nothing to see here, don't worry about it. Just like he says about other projects concerning the environment and country. And we know that we're already seeing devastating impacts of those particular projects that he fails to continue to talk to people about. He comes in here and he says, don't worry, if something's got a certificate already, it's fine. We'll just transfer the certificate. Madam Speaker, 40 years or so ago, when the waterfront was there, no one imagined it to be what it is today. The legislation that the minister's talking about actively shuts out Aboriginal Territorians who have connection to that place, who have the right to speak for that place, who carry the story of that place. This government sees Aboriginal people as a pastime. We're not a pastime. We're living, we're breathing, we're here every day. Our culture's alive, our people are alive, we are evolving. Aboriginal people who carry the song and storyline for the waterfront should be involved in decisions about the waterfront, not told you're excluded because of an agreement that is historical, that is old. Not told I've got to do a deal for a mate and I'm going to change the law. I'm going to change the law to make money and to not put people first. That's what we're seeing here. We've got to keep an eye on it. The government's now talking about the site of Project Sea Dragon, Legume, out in my electorate. That's black soil country. That's sacred land. That has stories. That has meaning to Aboriginal people. We cannot allow this government to erode those important sites that carry language. As the member for Mulka has already spoken about in this chamber, a sacred site is not just a place. You don't just drive out to a sacred site on the weekend to see it. It's a living, breathing thing. It's connected to Aboriginal people's stories, to their dreaming, to their social and emotional well-being. It's not something that can just be dismissed. We absolutely need people to be responsible. The legislation, as it was intended, Mr. Deputy Speaker, was introduced to make sure that territory sacred sites could be protected. That's when the legislation was passed. Now, when the Self-Government Act was granted to the Northern Territory in 1978, land and cultural heritage powers were also transferred to the Northern Territory to make those laws, including the protection of Aboriginal sacred sites. That's why today we have the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority. That's why we have the Northern Territory Sacred Sites Act. But this territory legislation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, no longer supports that important protection. Now, while that responsibility currently sits with the Territory, the Commonwealth does have the ability, through the constitutional power under Section 122 of the Australian Constitution, which gives authority over the Territories, to let them override Territory laws and reassert control. I hope to God that the Commonwealth are keeping an eye on this Territory government and that that power is considered to be returned to the Commonwealth, because Aboriginal people do not trust this government when it comes to the protection of sacred sites. The member for Breitling, who tries to say he's the most green credentialed person on that side, is dreaming. He's absolutely dreaming. He is delusional and distorted if he thinks that he is a green credentialed progressive person, because he's not. The changes that the government brought in to amend the sacred sites legislation is from a 2016 review that was done by the previous CLP government. 9 years old. Things change over 9 years. The government are the first to bang on about how, say, there's dramatic change in 9 years, but when it suits them, they'll pick up a review that's 9 years old and cherry-pick recommendations through it. Now, I know firsthand, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority, we're working with the Territory's land councils to do a comprehensive reform on the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority legislation, to change it, to increase penalties for people who do the wrong thing, to look at certificates, to look at cultural protection. They were working on that. That work was being done, and that work was good. That work was strong. That work was actual extensive consultation being done on Aboriginal time. Clear, concise, not rushing things through. Now, if the member for Breitling had the courage, had the guts, and didn't carry on in a cowardly manner, he would have picked that review up. He would have met with ARPA and he would have said, hey, you've done this work. Hey, land councils, you worked with ARPA on this work. Let's talk about this review. Let's implement this review. But no, he didn't. He ignored them and chose to do a review that had been done 9 years earlier. He comes in Parliament tonight and says, oh yeah, I met with the Land Council. I gave them a whole hour. Whoopee-doo, an hour's nothing. You're talking about thousands of years of stories, of culture, of dreaming, of connection, and you're celebrating giving them an hour? You come in here and you say, oh, look, I spoke to them and I picked a few things up for them. And then you try and verbal what they said and what you said about them and to them in a meeting out at Yulara. Not good enough. Not good enough. This is a government who rock up at NAIDOC events, who rock up at Indigenous Business Awards, who rock up at Reconciliation Week events, trying to celebrate Aboriginal people. You make me sick. Sick in the guts, because you come there two-faced, showing up saying we support you, but in a time of need, when the member for Mulca's brought this motion to Parliament to talk about how Aboriginal people actually really feel about your law, you've got nothing to say. Except for the minister, the member for Breitling, saying, she'll be right, mate, I think it's good. You're not black. You don't get to say that. You don't get to diminish the member for Mulca's contribution. He's telling you there's a problem. He's telling you people are getting sick when sites are getting damaged. He's telling you our identities are getting broken when bulldozers drive through something like nothing. There are so many parts of the Northern Territory that people go, there's never been a sacred site there before. No, dummy. We've never told you that there's a sacred site there before for that very reason. It's sacred. It doesn't need to be known by everyone. But when you want to do a development there, work with us, not against us. And stop saying that blackfellas are opposed to development. We want economic development. We're not anti-development. We just want to have ethical development that works in partnership with Aboriginal people, that works in partnership with the land, with our culture, with country. That's what we want. We're not anti-development. So many of my mob in the bush, they want to have businesses. They want to have opportunity. They can do it, and they know they can do it without it coming at a cost of country. So start listening. Start working with people. Start enabling them to have the opportunities for economic development. But it doesn't need to come at the cost of destroying country. We were in this chamber yesterday, and the Attorney-General and the Tourism Minister's talking about people come here for a cultural experience. That's right, Aboriginal culture. They come here to see the sites. And your very legislation provides the platform and the opportunity for these sites to be withered away. This is important. And I acknowledge, some of you might not truly grasp and understand that. And some of you never will. But at least get out into the remote regions of the Territory and listen, talk to people, walk with people, sit in the dirt with people. Do it in the city here. Go and meet with Larrakia. They're strong, they're important. They do an amazing job on this amazing place where we get to come to work. And they want to have economic development in Darwin. Absolutely they do. But they don't want it to come at the cost of their culture and of their social and emotional well-being. You might think that it's black magic, but it's real for us. When you put an 11-storey tower in front of a site that our elders have told you not to, people are going to get sick. Whether it's the people who build that thing there, whether it's the government that approve it, or whether it's Aboriginal people who are being punished for that to go there, people will get sick. And people will have to try and heal from that. That's what's at stake tonight. It's not the member for Mulka just coming in here because he wants to. He has a cultural obligation and a duty to the law of his people, of our people. I hear the mumbling over there. You've got something to say, stand up and say it. Because it'll be silence. Yeah, well, if the member for Guyula or whoever it is over there wants to say something, then stand up and say it. Because we hear people in the Northern Territory, Aboriginal Territorians, who I will remind you are just as equal as any other Territorian. They want to hear from you. They want to hear what you're going to do when their people are getting sick. They want to hear from you about how you can work with them on ethical development opportunities. Doesn't come at the cost of country. That's what they want. And we need to respect this MPI tonight.
Thank you, Member for Guyula. Any further speakers? Any further speakers? I'm going to ask again. Member for Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I rise today as a non-Aboriginal person and as an independent member of this Legislative Assembly to speak to this matter of definite public importance, the failure of the 𝒂𝒐𝒕𝒊𝒐𝒏 government to maintain and uphold the Northern Territory's critical system for the protection of Aboriginal sacred sites. And I thank the member for Mulka for bringing this matter to the chamber today, and I thank the member for 𝒂𝒄𝒓𝒆𝒅 for so passionately outlining how this actually impacts on Aboriginal people, the people that we're all here to represent. This failure strikes at the heart of our integrity as a jurisdiction. It undermines the rule of law because it signals that those with economic power can disregard the law with impunity, while those charged with upholding it are left without support. And it betrays the promise of the Northern Territory Aboriginal Sacred Sites Act 1989, a statute that has long stood as one of the most important recognitions of Aboriginal law and belief in Australia. The Sacred Sites Act is not just another piece of environmental regulation, it's a foundational law of recognition. It acknowledges that Aboriginal people are the traditional owners and custodians of their country, and that the protection of sacred sites is integral to the maintenance of their law, of their culture and their identity. The Sacred Sites Act also forms part of a suite of laws designed to benefit Aboriginal people and includes the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, the NT's companion legislation, the Aboriginal Land Act 1978, the Heritage Act 2011 and the Native Title Act. These laws not only assist all of us by recognising Aboriginal Territorians' enduring relationship with land, ensuring their legal ownership and control over country, protecting their cultural and spiritual heritage, they also provide a framework through which development in the Northern Territory can proceed with certainty, without controversy and with a social licence. The Act is grounded in Section 73(1)(a) of the Aboriginal Land Rights Act 1976, which gives this territory the power and responsibility to legislate for the protection of sacred sites. It does so through the independent Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority, a statutory body at arm's length from government with clear duties to consult, issue authority certificates and enforce compliance. Mr Deputy Speaker, that independence is its strength. That independence provides the all-important certainty for developers and custodians alike. And it is that independence which this government has systematically undermined. In May this year, Acting Judge Stephen Ledeck handed down a judgment in the Vista Gold case, Australia prosecution, a case that should have been a line in the sand. Vista Gold pleaded guilty to damaging a sacred site near Leyland Edith Falls on Darwin country while conducting drilling operations at the Mount Todd mine. 12 drill holes were sunk within a restricted works area, an area the company knew was sacred and where they were prohibited from drilling. In his sentencing remarks, Acting Judge Stephen Ledeck described Vista Gold's conduct as nothing more than a mercenary exercise where they had been looking for what they believed was there, but unfortunately found it to be under a restricted works area. He said the offence was driven by everything to do with the price of gold and noted that the fine of $160,000 was insignificant compared to the company's projected profit of more than $500 million. Mr Deputy Speaker, that is not the failure of the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority. That is a failure of political will. The authority did its job, it investigated, prosecuted and secured a conviction. But when the judiciary itself tells us that the penalties are insignificant, it's the government's job to respond. Instead, the CLP government has been busy weakening the very framework that allows the ARPA to protect sacred sites in the first place. These changes were pushed through no matter what the Minister says without genuine consultation. Traditional owners, the Northern Land Council, the Central Land Council and the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority itself raised alarm. The amendments neither streamline nor modernise the Sacred Sites Act. They serve a single purpose, to permit one politically convenient project, the Waterfront Hotel, despite Larrakia opposition grounded in the protection of a registered sacred site. I am told that the rush of applications predicted by the CLP to justify these changes has not occurred and can be counted on one hand. The NLC described the bill as a rush job that undermines the integrity of sacred site protection in favour of developers. The CLC said the government treated us like children. And, Madam Speaker, they were right. By allowing certificates to be transferred or altered after issue, the government has opened the door to regulatory manipulation. It's created conditions where a proponent can obtain a certificate for one purpose and later repurpose it for another without renewed custodial consent. And by introducing enforceable undertakings as an alternative to prosecution, the government risks turning the protection of sacred sites into a private negotiation between developers and bureaucrats, rather than a matter of public accountability under law. This is not reform, this is regression. And Madam Speaker, perhaps the most serious failure is this government's systematic erosion of the Aboriginal Area Protection Authority's independence. The 𝒂𝒄𝒓𝒄𝒕𝒊𝒐𝒏 is a statutory authority, it's not a branch of government. It was designed that way to protect it from political interference so that it could stand firm in upholding Aboriginal law even when development pressures mount. For more than 40 years, it's managed and mediated the intersection of Aboriginal cultural responsibilities and the Territory's development ambitions. Every major project, every road, every piece of public infrastructure and every mine has been considered by the authority. The vast majority of those projects have proceeded without any controversy because of 𝒂𝒄𝒓𝒄𝒂𝒑's work in facilitating agreements that respect sacred sites and support responsible development. Only a small number of matters ever reach public attention, and that is a mark of the authority's effectiveness. The 𝒂𝒄𝒓𝒄𝒂𝒑 has quietly managed complexity into outcomes that balance cultural protection with progress, and the Northern Territory should be proud of this institution. Yet the CLP government has treated the authority as a political inconvenience. It's refused to support the organisation with adequate funding despite the growing complexity of projects such as Sun Cable, Arrows, onshore gas in the Beetaloo Basin and the Darwin Waterfront Hotel development. It's steadily undermined the authority's standing by reshaping the legislative framework in ways that erode its independence and bring key functions closer to ministerial control. Rather than strengthening the authority, as the Minister just said, this government has weakened it and in doing so weakened public confidence in the protection of sacred sites. We all understand the Territory needs development. We need investment, we need jobs, we need infrastructure, but responsible development is not the same as reckless development. Responsible development requires proper, respectful consultation with traditional owners, proper respect for cultural authority and Aboriginal law, transparent and enforceable conditions on all certificates, and a government willing to stand up for cultural heritage even when it is politically inconvenient. The CLP government's actions send the opposite message. They tell the world that sacred sites are negotiable and that culture is an obstacle, not a value. That approach undermines not only Aboriginal people, but the credibility of the Northern Territory as a responsible place to do business. We know that investors crave certainty and integrity. They want to know that when approvals are granted, they are lawful, defensible and grounded in respect. And when this government erodes the independence of the 𝒂𝒄𝒓𝒄𝒂𝒑 and politicises the Sacred Sites Act, we invite risk, we invite controversy and we invite distrust. This pattern of disregard did not start with Vista Gold. We saw it in the Gunlom Falls case, where the Federal Court and later the High Court found that the Director of National Parks had breached the Sacred Sites Act by authorising works that had desecrated a sacred site. That case was a triumph for the rule of law and for the authority's integrity, but it also exposed the chronic vulnerability of sacred site protection when government agencies themselves fail to comply. And now, under this government, that vulnerability has been codified into policy. Instead of strengthening the system in the wake of Gunlom, the government has chosen to weaken it. As an independent member of this Assembly, I say clearly the protection of sacred sites should not be the plaything of politics. It should be the cornerstone of our legislative integrity. An independent, properly funded and professionally supported 𝒂𝒄𝒓𝒄𝒂𝒑 should be a source of pride for every Territorian. It embodies the principle that development in the Territory must occur under two laws, Aboriginal law and Australian law, working together, not in conflict. Every day in this chamber, we hear the member for Mauka saying, "Work with me." Every day he puts that invitation to people in this chamber. Madam Speaker, this is not support, this is sabotage. If we are serious about responsible development, this government must act now to restore proper funding to the 𝒂𝒄𝒓𝒄𝒂𝒑 and guarantee its independence. It must review the penalty regime under the Act so that fines deter rather than reward corporate risk-taking. It must reinstate genuine consultation processes with land councils and traditional owners. It must amend the Act to reverse the recent changes that have weakened protections and commit to full transparency in decision-making so that every authority certificate and condition is open to public scrutiny. Madam Speaker, these are not partisan objectives. They are essential steps to rebuild trust and uphold the Territory's reputation for fair and responsible governance. Madam Speaker, this government has failed to support the authority. It's failed to uphold the spirit and letter of the Sacred Sites Act. It's failed to protect the cultural and spiritual heritage of this territory and has failed to show respect to Aboriginal Territorians, including those here in this chamber. In the Vista Gold case, the judge told us plainly the fine was insignificant and the conduct was mercenary. That judgment should have prompted legislative action. Instead, this government used its majority to make things worse. Madam Speaker, sacred sites are not an inconvenience to be managed. They are the living heart of Aboriginal culture and, by extension, the living heart of this place that we call the Northern Territory. To weaken their protection is to wound the Territory itself. Madam Speaker, I once again thank the member for Mulka for bringing this important matter of public importance to the House. And I say that it's time to restore integrity and to restore respect and put protection before profit and law before politics. Madam Speaker, I commend this matter to the House.
Are there any other speakers? Member for Daly.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And firstly, before I speak, I would like to thank the member for Mulka for bringing this important matter of public importance to the Assembly this evening on the Sacred Sites Act changes. But Madam Speaker, before I get into my speech, I would like to acknowledge the Larrakia people on the land that we meet on in Parliament, a place that many people actually see this place as a sacred place in the Westminster system. And what's disappointing from this CLP government is that each year at the start of this Assembly, the Larrakia people come to this place and welcome all of us as elected members to represent every single Territorian across the Northern Territory and welcome us to their country. And what we have seen from the CLP government is a gutless act by the Minister Boygoin, to make changes and weaken the rights for traditional owners. And more recently, we have seen that in play, taking away the rights of Larrakia people down at the waterfront. And that is what was flagged by many Aboriginal organisations, from the land councils to Larrakia Nation, Aboriginal organisation, saying that the weakening of those protections will mean that development will go at all cost. So it's disappointing that the CLP government continue to disregard the voices of Aboriginal people all across the Northern Territory, but more importantly, or not more importantly, sorry, just as importantly, the Larrakia people who welcome us here at the start of each chamber. Madam Speaker, as I've mentioned many times in this place, sacred sites are dotted out across the Northern Territory and have a profound significance for Aboriginal Territorians. I spoke earlier this year in the Assembly about how they can be the hills, the rocks, the waterholes, the trees, the plains, the lakes, the billabongs, the sky, amongst many other natural features, because they are not disconnected to us. They are all intertwined in who we are as Aboriginal people. Again, in the coastal and sea areas of Darwin, where the Larrakia people have lived for generations, sacred sites exist, including features above and below the water, such as the culturally significant Stokes Hill Dreaming Site, a dream site that is now under threat because of this CLP government. Because of legislative change by the CLP government, a multi-storey hotel can be built without triggering a new heritage assessment. Sacred sites are the responsibility of Aboriginal custodians who protect them and whose rights and roles are intertwined through kingship and relationships to this land. Madam Speaker, custodians play a vital role in managing the site and ensuring its safety. It's embodied in cultural knowledge and preserves important stories and assumes spiritual responsibilities for the land, all essential to honouring and sustaining our heritage. Most importantly, Madam Speaker, it is an intrinsic part of the continuing body of practice and beliefs for Aboriginal laws and our traditions. Madam Speaker, Territory Labor recognises the importance of economic development. We are committing to supporting initiatives that responsibly drive growth in the Territory and create jobs, ensuring all Territorians benefit in the long term. However, it should be an advancing economy that honours the Northern Territory's cultural heritage, because economic progress and the protection of cultural heritage should coexist, which fosters mutual respect for traditional owners and their rights. The CLP has consistently shown unacceptable transparency in this regard, especially when we look back only a few months ago, harking back to the debate on the Sacred Sites Amendment Act, a bill crafted in secrecy without any genuine consultation with Aboriginal Territorians. While that bill, unlike this morning's three introduced bills, was sent to the Scrutiny Committee, the government members' performance on that committee was absolutely inadequate. The committee inquiry received over 30 submissions voicing concerns regarding the lack of consultation and the limited submission timeframe. The Central Land Council stated in their submission, there has been no genuine consultation about the bill with the Central Land Council or the people it represents. They refused to hold public hearings for 30 organisations, a move that blatantly sabotages the very nature of the appropriate scrutiny process and solidify the secretive top-down nature of this CLP government. A CLP government that has continually failed to consult those matters effectively. Additionally, the submission to the committee at the time made it clear that the bill disrespected cultural authority, weakened protections and risks contravening federal law. Instead of strengthening protections, it damaged safeguards and muted Aboriginal voices, risking conflict where there should be consent. We have spoken about it in this Assembly several times. It is essential to talk, to work together and create solutions that respect the views of Aboriginal Territorians. They need to be involved from the very beginning. This is the approach that a valid government grounded in integrity and genuine commitment to its people would embrace. Not conduct tokenistic meetings where the Minister merely provides minimal details to check off a consultation requirement. Madam Speaker, I've been travelling across my electorate speaking with constituents who are infuriated by this government's decision regarding their land, culture and laws. And Madam Speaker, I remember getting out speaking to many constituents as this bill was introduced to the Parliament. And many people completely shocked by what the government was proposing to put forward within the bill at that time. Madam Speaker, They tried to make us believe, the CLP tried to make us believe their approach would simplify processes, but failed to tell us for whom. Still, it is trying to cover up the profound consequences for traditional owners. That is because the government has now made it possible for certificates issued decades ago to be exploited by developers who are completely different from the custodians who hold cultural responsibility for that land. Failing to acknowledge changes in land use, evolving cultural knowledge, and the possibility that some knowledge holders may have passed away. Undermining the traditional owners' rights to be heard on their own country. Aboriginal custodians whose sacred sites these certificates are designed to protect would have no say. Authority certificates are not commercial licences, Madam Speaker. They have to have an understanding. This understanding hinges on the recognition that specific individuals with distant contexts were granted explicit consent to engage in particular activities on sacred land. Madam Speaker, we know Aboriginal Territorians struggle with the government's surrounding trust. Trust in what they say, trust in what they do, trust in how they use land. But Madam Speaker, I want to move back to the enforceable undertakings, another concerning feature highlighted by submissions, which allows companies to privately negotiate outcomes when sacred sites are damaged rather than face prosecution. Madam Speaker, these deals can be made without informing custodians, without their advice and with no right of appeal. Allowing accountability and transparency to be lost, sacred sites can be harmed and the response can be handled in secret. If a sacred site suffers damage, traditional owners must be involved in the response. So, Madam Speaker, again, Territory Labor supports a reform that works to empower traditional owners and not undercut their essential role as custodians of sacred sites. As I said earlier, Madam Speaker, our opposition is not opposition to economic development. Labor supports responsible development that grows the Territory economy, creates jobs and delivers long-term benefits for all Territorians. But economic progress and cultural heritage protection are not mutually excluded. They must go hand in hand, built on respect for traditional owners and for traditional owners' rights. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Are there any more speakers? Leader of the Opposition.
I rise to speak on this matter of public importance that is brought to the chamber by the member for Mulka, and appreciate that the topic around sacred sites here in the Northern Territory is of importance, particularly when we consider, Madam Speaker, the third of the Territory's population are Aboriginal Territorians. And I think in regards to the issue raised, but also the points in debate raised by the member for Mulka, quite topical in terms of the concerns from not just Aboriginal Territorians that have been raised when it comes to sacred sites, but also the general community, and particularly those who are working in the Aboriginal land councils. We have 4 Aboriginal land councils who are tasked with being the prescribed body corporates of Aboriginal land, the statutory role that they have under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act of 1975, have I got it right, Chair? Yeah. 1975, in being able to recognise that 80% of the Northern Territory's coastline is recognised as Aboriginal land, Aboriginal sea country, and 50% of the Northern Territory's land mass, Madam Speaker, is recognised as Aboriginal land. Sits on land that is safeguarded and cared for by Aboriginal custodians and recognised either as Aboriginal land or Aboriginal land trust parcels, Madam Speaker. So it is quite pertinent in the issues, particularly over the last few weeks, that have centred on Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority and the duties around their independent role for the care of sacred sites when it comes to the balance with what traditional owners would like to see on country and development and proposals of development that happen on country. I think the worry and the real mistrust that is growing, not just, as I said, from Aboriginal Territorians, but also those who work in those very important fields, and particularly the ones that we consider should be independent, Madam Speaker. I think that has become more and more of a concern under the CLP government, that, and I'm saying this in a very, very polite and diplomatic way, where the lines of responsibility become blurred and the overreach and the overstep of authority and power is becoming more and more glaringly obvious, that the CLP do not understand that independent statutory bodies should be just that. They should be independent of government, report to and they meet with government, but they should not have the influence of government. And we are starting to see a real deterioration of that independence, that perception of independence and or real independence that should be noted under those very important bodies like ARPA, the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority. It's been reported quite heavily in the last couple of weeks, Madam Speaker, and the blurred lines between relationships and conflicts of interest that exist for the CLP government ministers and members is becoming more and more public. And the more public it becomes, Madam Speaker, the less we hear from the CLP, who often have a lot to say in here, but they don't necessarily answer the questions and concerns that are raised by the opposition or the crossbench when it comes to those specific concerns. And it's not things that we're just making up because we're members of parliament and not in government. They're real concerns that are growing across the community, and we're starting to see that level of activism and advocacy against the government, because people really don't feel that not just the government's listening, but they don't feel that the government is taking those concerns seriously, that they're being dismissed, that they are being completely set aside, and that they are not areas that the government either focuses on, pays attention to, provides due diligence or care. So we're starting to see a very dangerous slippery slope that the government is transitioning into their promise to Territorians. And don't forget, Madam Speaker, they promised it many times over before the August election in 2024, the promise of accountability, openness, responsibility to the people of the Northern Territory, to where we are now 14 months later, Madam Speaker, and more questions get asked and less of those questions are getting answered or even responded to, Madam Speaker. We are seeing constantly in the media the government is not responding. The government chose not to respond. A government spokesperson, which is code for the protection of a minister so that they don't implicate themselves as a sworn allegiance to the Crown, as a minister of the King. Madam Speaker, we're seeing more and more, and we're seeing the deflection, we're seeing the turning of responsibility and accountability to, as I said yesterday, and I think it's just as relevant for this particular MPI that the member for Mulka has brought out, the blaming of the former Labor government for the past 8 years, or a deflection to responsibilities and duties, deflecting from the Northern Territory government's duties of the CLP to the federal members of the Albanese Labor government. So there's this, are we going to see this for the next 3 years, Madam Speaker? It's starting to seem like a very, very bad pattern of the CLP going to this lack of accountability, openness and transparency. And I think when it comes to sacred sites, the fact that we don't have a minister responsible, we heard the member for Breakley speak in response to the member for Mulka raising this MPI, but we don't have that level of connection to the key stakeholders. We have a very new connection, that's fine, I'm not dismissing that, but in terms of new to perhaps the relationships and the care of those duties now in government, I think the member for Breitling has provided, a small amount of response to the concerns. But if we looked at it as a pie, Madam Speaker, we'd have a large CLP pie there and a tiny 5% slice of information coming out of that pie. And I think the 95% is the big concern for Territorians in general, but particularly when it comes to the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority, and what has been questioned and not answered recently continues to remain of a big focus of our Northern Territory community, Madam Speaker. And as the member for Guyula said, the clear part of the connection around development on country, economic growth, social growth of programs, I think is something that is really embraced, particularly by our 4 Aboriginal land councils. But the balance has to be about the respect of land, of culture, of country, of generational custodianship when it comes to sacred sites. And by that measure, we know that what was brought into this parliament earlier on in the year, the bill that was brought before the House by the member for Breitling, completely failed to hit the mark. As the member for Guyula pointed out, Madam Speaker, many, many years old, the decision, things have moved on. It would be great if the CLP government recognised that our Aboriginal land councils have also moved on and matured with some of the areas that they focus on, particularly when it comes to development. Some legislation federally has also impacted the Northern Territory, particularly during COVID, where the biosecurity zones were enacted, and that was done with the full support of the 4 Aboriginal land councils to keep Territorians safe during the global pandemic. So there are abilities to be agile and contemporary and modern. There's also the ability to recognise all of the thousands of generations of history and culture and trying to fit it into this, the parliament system that we have. And I think the member for Mulka said it very eloquently from the family member from Gungun around, the law of the land. And I think that really does show the deep connection, not just to country, but to knowledge when it comes to cultural heritage and protection, which really is what the Sacred Sites of the Northern Territory Act is all about. And I think the lack of respect and transparency and genuine partnership when it comes to Aboriginal custodians, it can't be lip service, Madam Speaker. The ability, and any person, doesn't matter if you're black, white, brown, brindle, whatever, the ability to be able to trust in a relationship, it can be broken pretty quickly, and it is so hard to rebuild trust when it is broken, Madam Speaker. And that could be from a political sense, that could be from a personal sense. It can be really, really hard to rebuild that trust, Madam Speaker. The cultural protection that the Aboriginal Sacred Sites Act here in the Northern Territory should provide, it should be around that balance again, around development and accountability. And it's very clear, Madam Speaker, with everything that's come out over the last couple of months, that the CLP are plain intention of changing the Sacred Sites Act with that limitation of actually engaging and being open and transparent about those changes was purely about one particular development, and that's here in Darwin on Larrakia country, as Member for Mulka has spoken in depth about in presenting the matter of public importance. And at the bare minimum, Madam Speaker, if a sacred site is damaged, traditional owners must be empowered to be part of that response. And that's why the independence of the Aboriginal Areas Protection Act is so important, Madam Speaker, because the heart of culture and sacred sites, if they have been damaged, then that can damage years and years and years of the connection to country or language or story, and the next generation, the health and well-being of the next generation, whose responsibility will be to take on that custodianship of that sacred site. And if a sacred site is damaged or ruined or desecrated, then this creates damage for that next generation, not just the current generation of traditional owners and custodians, but the next hundreds of generations, because that part of culture, language and story, it no longer exists. And if you can put it in a modern European sense, Madam Speaker, when we saw the Notre Dame, the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris burning, I think many people around the world, whether they've been there or not, were quite affected. It is a historic building with much story, much of its own Western ceremony and being a church. And when the cathedral was burnt, and it took years and years and years for repair, it's never the same, but that damage really did make a big impact, and not just for the French in Paris and the country of France, but around the world. So just in terms of a connection in, well, what does this mean if I can't or see a sacred site or know the sort of stories of a sacred site? Think of that in the Western sense and how that can correlate across and transcend, hopefully, cultures to provide a bit of an insight into how important it is to have places that are of such significance that they become sacred. And that's why I use Notre Dame in terms of the church example, Madam Speaker, because I think that's one that most people in a Western sense would be able to understand and know and to connect to. So hopefully that provides the House with a bit of insight as to why the matter of public importance by the member for Mulka has been raised, because if you have legislation that is to protect sacred sites, look at it in the French sense, you know, to protect these historic buildings such as Notre Dame, then you do need to ensure that there are provisions, guidelines, ongoing cultural maintenance that have the responsibility to be able to balance, again, we're talking about development in the Northern Territory, to balance the needs and the aspirations of traditional owners and also that healthy growth of the economy and business on country. So I really do, I know we can't change anything in this system at the moment, because in the Western political system, the government has the numbers, they can squash, they can pass whatever they want without any care of what the other members of parliament say or do, and then that resonates out to the rest of the territory and the people that we all represent across all of our electorates. So the cultural heartbreak of sacred sites being damaged, it's not just about heritage, but it is also about the health and well-being of those generations who rely on that connection, the sacred sites and protected sites, which should continue to be significant places for the traditional owners, the clans, the tribes who connect and need that as part of their culture to be preserved for those future generations, the health and well-being of their family and the future of their families. So I very much thank, Madam Speaker, the member for Mulka for bringing such an important matter to the House. I think it's something that unfortunately will continue to be an issue and a topic that we need to follow very closely. But on an evening like tonight, Madam Speaker, I think it is much food for thought for the government to go away and reflect and to think about how do they engage with Aboriginal Territorians, how do they respect the independence of the Aboriginal Area Protections Authority.
If there are no more speakers, that concludes the matter of public importance that we've been debating tonight.